How much impact can a simple act of kindness really have? In this story, an innocent gesture from an 8-year-old girl transforms not just one life, but an entire community. If you enjoy stories like these, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more heartwarming content. And let us know what you think in the comments below. It starts with Emily, a young girl who offers her lunch to a lonely stranger in the park. What seems like a small, compassionate act quickly unravels a much bigger story, one filled with unexpected twists and emotional moments. Who is this man? And how does this single encounter change everything? Keep watching to discover how kindness can create ripples that go far beyond what anyone could have imagined. In the heart of a sprawling city, where the noise of traffic and the constant bustle of people created a never-ending hum, there was a small neighborhood that seemed immune to the chaos. The buildings here were older, their bricks weathered by time, and the streets were narrower, with trees lining the sidewalks like guardians of a quieter, simpler life. This was where Emily Harper, an 8-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and a wide, curious smile, lived with her mother, Sarah Harper. Emily's world was small but full. Their apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom space with creaky floors and chipped paint. But it was home. Every corner of the apartment was filled with warmth. Sarah had made sure of that. There were family pictures on the walls, Emily's crayon drawings framed proudly in the hallway, and the smell of freshly baked bread often lingered in the air, a testament to Sarah's love for cooking. Sarah was a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital. Her shifts were grueling, and the constant juggling of responsibilities left her exhausted. But she never let that show to Emily. To her, being a good mother meant making sure Emily's world was bright, even if her own was often stressful and tiring. They spent their evenings cooking together, reading stories before bed, and sharing laughs at the kitchen table. It was these moments that Sarah cherished the most, when the outside world disappeared, and it was just the two of them. Emily, with her boundless energy and compassionate heart, was the light of Sarah's life. She was a girl who could make friends with anyone, who noticed when people were sad, and who always offered to help, whether it was a classmate struggling with their homework or an elderly neighbor carrying groceries. In her short years, she had already learned one important lesson from her mother: kindness matters. One bright Friday afternoon, as the school bell rang to signal the end of the day, Emily gathered her things and hurried toward her favorite place, the park. The park wasn't far from their apartment, just a few blocks away, and it was a small oasis of green amidst the concrete jungle. There were swings, a playground, and plenty of trees where Emily could sit and watch the world go by. Today, as Emily skipped down the familiar sidewalk, her backpack bouncing with each step, she noticed something different. As she approached the park's entrance, her eyes were drawn to a man sitting alone on one of the benches. He was slumped over, his head bowed, his clothes dirty and worn. His long beard and tangled hair made him look older than he probably was, and there was a sadness about him that Emily couldn't ignore. The man's name was James Miller, though at that moment, he didn't feel like anyone at all. To the world around him, he was invisible. People walked by without a second glance, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the man sitting quietly, his stomach rumbling with hunger. James had been homeless for several months now, wandering the streets, sleeping wherever he could find shelter. Each day felt like a battle for survival, and most days he wondered how much longer he could keep going. Emily, however, saw him. She didn't walk past like the others. Instead, her heart swelled with empathy. She had never seen James before, but something about him made her stop. Without a second thought, she reached into her backpack and pulled out the sandwich her mother had packed for her lunch, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, her favorite. With the sandwich in hand, Emily took a deep breath and approached the bench where James was sitting. Her small, hesitant footsteps made little noise, but as she got closer, James noticed her presence. He looked up, his tired blue eyes meeting hers. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, Emily with her bright, innocent gaze, and James with eyes that had seen too much. "Excuse me, sir," Emily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James blinked, startled by the small voice addressing him. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him kindly, let alone a child. "Yes?" he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. Emily held out the sandwich, a shy smile tugging at her lips. I thought you might be hungry. Would you like my sandwich? James stared at the sandwich in disbelief. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and here was this little girl offering him her food. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for it, but then he hesitated. "That's very kind of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But don't you need it?" Emily shook her head, her smile widening. "No, I had a big lunch at school," she fibbed. "My mom always says that sharing is caring." James hesitated for only a moment longer before accepting the sandwich. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What's your name?" "I'm Emily," she replied proudly, her brown eyes sparkling. "What's your name?" James looked down at the sandwich, unwrapping it carefully as if it were a precious gift. "James," he said softly. "Emily, you've just made my day a whole lot better." Emily sat down on the bench beside James, her small legs swinging above the ground. The other children in the park were playing on the swings and climbing the jungle gym, but Emily's attention was focused on the man sitting next to her. She watched as he took a slow, careful bite of the sandwich, his eyes closing briefly as he savored the taste. For James, the sandwich was more than just food. It was a reminder that, despite everything he had been through, there were still good people in the world. The simple act of kindness from this little girl was enough to lift the weight of her loneliness, if only for a moment. "Why are you sitting here all alone?" Emily asked, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. James paused, chewing slowly as he thought about how to answer her. He didn't want to burden her with the harsh realities of his life, but he also didn't want to lie. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way we expect," he said quietly, "and it can be hard to find your way back. But kind people like you make it a little easier." Emily didn't fully understand what James meant, but she nodded solemnly, sensing the weight of his words. They sat in silence for a while, James finishing the sandwich and Emily watching the other children play. Every now and then, James would glance over at Emily, his heart filled with gratitude. She didn't treat him like a homeless man. She treated him like a person. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the park, Emily realized it was time to go home. Her mother would be expecting her for dinner soon. She stood up from the bench, brushing off the seat of her dress. "I have to go now," she said, her voice soft but cheerful. "Will you be okay?" James nodded, offering her a small but genuine smile. "Thanks to you, I'm better than I've been in a long time." Emily smiled brightly, giving James a little wave before turning and skipping off toward the entrance of the park. Her heart felt light, and there was a bounce in her step. She couldn't wait to tell her mother about her new friend. As Emily disappeared down the sidewalk, James sat back on the bench, his heart full of emotions he hadn't felt in years. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be cared for, even in such a small way. That little girl had given him more than just a sandwich, she had given him hope. Emily burst through the door of their apartment that evening, her face glowing with excitement. The familiar smell of her mother's cooking filled the air, and Sarah was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. She looked up as Emily entered, immediately noticing the bright smile on her daughter's face. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You look like you had a good day. What's got you so excited?" Emily practically skipped across the room, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Mom, you won't believe what happened. I met a man in the park. His name is James, and he looked really sad and hungry, so I gave him my sandwich, and we talked, and he said I made him happy." Sarah's smile faltered slightly as she listened to her daughter's story. She knelt down to Emily's level, her hands resting gently on her daughter's small shoulders. "Emily, honey," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "you gave your sandwich to a stranger?" Emily nodded enthusiastically, her brown curls bouncing. "Yes, Mom. He was so nice, and he was really grateful. You should have seen his smile." Sarah's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's compassion, but there was also a nagging sense of worry. She had taught Emily to be kind, but the world was full of dangers that an 8-year-old couldn't possibly understand. "Sweetheart, that was very generous of you, but we need to talk about being careful around strangers." "But Mom," Emily protested, her face scrunching in confusion. "James wasn't scary. He was just hungry and alone." Sarah sighed, pulling Emily into a hug. "I know, baby. I know you have a big heart, and that's one of the things I love most about you. But not everyone in the world is as kind as you are, and we need to make sure you're safe." Emily nodded against her mother's shoulder, though she didn't fully understand the concern. In her mind, she had simply helped someone in need, just like her mother had always taught her. "I promise, Mom. I'll be careful." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with worry. Was the man in the park really harmless? Had Emily unknowingly put herself in danger? As much as she wanted to trust that everything was fine, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. The next morning, their quiet routine was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she opened the door to find two police officers standing in the hallway, their expressions serious. "Good morning, ma'am," the taller officer said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Are you Sarah Harper?" Sarah nodded, her mouth suddenly dried. "Yes, I am. Is something wrong?" The officer exchanged a glance with his partner before speaking again. "We'd like to speak with you and your daughter, Emily. It's regarding an incident that occurred yesterday evening." As Sarah ushered the officers into their small living room, her mind raced with questions. What could this possibly be about? Had something happened to James after Emily left the park? "Emily, honey," Sarah called out gently. "Can you come here, please?" Emily appeared in the doorway, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, sensing the tension in the room, before walking over to her mother's side. "What's going on, Mom?" she asked, her voice small. One of the officers, a kind-eyed woman named Officer Daniels, knelt down to Emily's level and smiled reassuringly. "Hi, Emily. I'm Officer Daniels, and we just want to ask you a few questions about the man you met in the park yesterday. Can you tell us a little bit about him?" Emily nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration as she recalled the details of her encounter with James. She described how he had been sitting on the bench, looking sad and hungry, and how she had given him her sandwich. As she spoke, the officers listened carefully, jotting down notes. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Why were the police so interested in this man? Had something happened after Emily left? She didn't want to alarm her daughter, but the growing knot of fear in her stomach was impossible to ignore. After a few more questions, the officers stood to leave, thanking Emily for her help. As they walked toward the door, Sarah couldn't hold back her concern any longer. "Officers, what's this all about? Has something happened to the man my daughter met?" Officer Daniels hesitated for a moment before answering. "The man your daughter met, James Miller, was found unconscious in the park later that evening. He's currently in the hospital, and we're trying to piece together what happened before he was found." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Unconscious? Is he going to be okay?" "We're not sure yet," Officer Daniels replied gently. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but your daughter's interaction with him is the last known contact we have before he was found. We may need to follow up with you in the coming days." As the officers left, Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. She had no idea how this was going to affect her or Emily, but one thing was clear. Their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't possibly predict. The morning after the police visit, Sarah felt a lingering unease. She couldn't stop thinking about the officers' words. Jonathan Edwards, as they now knew him, had been found unconscious. What had happened to him after Emily left? Was it something serious? And what did this mean for their small family, now that they were involved? As the news about Emily's encounter spread through their neighborhood, Sarah began to feel the full weight of the community's attention. The apartment building, usually so quiet and comfortable, now felt like a spotlight. Neighbors stopped Sarah in the hallways to ask about what had happened, some offering sympathy, while others gave her looks of concern, or worse, judgment. At the local grocery store, Mrs. Peterson, one of Sarah's more nosy neighbors, approached her with a tight smile. "Sarah, I heard about Emily's little adventure in the park," she said, her voice dripping with both concern and accusation. "It must be hard raising a child on your own. You've always done such a good job, but this... Well, you have to be careful. You never know who people really are." Sarah forced a polite smile, her grip tightening on her grocery basket. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Peterson, but Emily didn't do anything wrong. She was just trying to help someone in need." Mrs. Peterson's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, it's just, with everything going on these days, you can't be too careful. That man could have been dangerous. It's your responsibility to make sure she's safe." Sarah's stomach churned, but she managed to keep her voice calm. Thank you for your advice, but I trust Emily's judgment, and I'm teaching her to be kind. That's what matters. Mrs. Peterson nodded but didn't seem convinced. As Sarah walked away, she could feel the woman's eyes on her, and a low murmur of conversation started behind her. The weight of judgment from her neighbors hung heavy in the air. Emily's act of kindness, which had seemed so simple and pure, was now being scrutinized by everyone around them. At home, things were no easier. The whispers of the neighbors seemed to follow them wherever they went. Some people offered kind words, but others, like Mrs. Peterson, questioned Sarah's parenting, suggesting she had been reckless in allowing Emily to interact with a stranger. Emily, however, remained blissfully unaware of the deeper undercurrents in the neighborhood. She continued to go about her days with her usual enthusiasm, talking excitedly about school and the park. Sarah wanted to protect that innocence for as long as she could, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking Emily home from school, they passed a group of mothers chatting on the sidewalk. The moment they spotted Sarah and Emily, the conversation stopped abruptly, and the women exchanged glances. "Is that her?" one of them whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "The girl who met that homeless man?" "Poor thing," another woman added, shaking her head. "She's so young. She doesn't know any better." Sarah quickened her pace, keeping her head down as she gripped Emily's hand a little tighter. She could feel her daughter looking up at her, confused by the sudden tension. "Mom?" Emily asked softly. "Why are they whispering?" Sarah sighed, trying to find the right words to explain. "Sometimes people don't understand why we do nice things for others. They might think it's strange or risky, but that doesn't mean what you did was wrong." Emily frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "But I just wanted to help James. Why would that be bad?" "It's not bad, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "What you did was kind and brave. Don't ever forget that." Despite Sarah's reassurance, the weight of the community's judgment hung heavily over them. Every time they left the apartment, Sarah felt like they were being watched, their every move scrutinized. And as the days passed, the pressure only seemed to grow. A week after the police visit, Sarah received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Officer Daniels. Her voice was calm but carried an urgency that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "Mrs. Harper," Officer Daniels began, "we've learned more about James Miller. His real name is Jonathan Edwards. He's been missing for over a year." Sarah's hand gripped the phone tightly. "Missing? What do you mean?" Officer Daniels explained that Jonathan Edwards had suffered a traumatic event about a year ago. He had disappeared without a trace, and his family had been searching for him ever since. His memory loss had left him wandering the streets, unaware of who he was or where he belonged. He had been living as James Miller, a name he had adopted during his time on the streets, surviving day by day with no knowledge of his past life. When Emily spoke to him and offered him her sandwich, Officer Daniels continued, it triggered something in his memory. It was a small gesture, but it helped him begin to remember who he really was. Sarah's heart raced. "So, what does this mean? What happens now?" "His family has been contacted and they're coming to see him," Officer Daniels said. "They're incredibly grateful for what Emily did. In fact, they'd like to meet you both." Sarah's mind whirled with the new information. Emily had unknowingly helped a man rediscover his identity, reuniting him with a family that had been searching for him for over a year. The simplicity of her daughter's act of kindness had set off a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. But with that revelation came new concerns. How would this affect Emily? What would meeting Jonathan's family be like? And most of all, was this something Emily should even be involved in? "Do we have to meet them?" Sarah asked, her voice wavering. "I don't want to overwhelm Emily. She's just a child." Officer Daniels' tone softened. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Harper. The Edwards family is very understanding. They don't want to overwhelm Emily either. They just want to express their gratitude." After a moment of silence, Sarah agreed to the meeting. She knew that Emily would want to see Jonathan again, to know that he was okay. And if the meeting was as simple as that, just a chance for a family to thank them, it couldn't hurt, right? The meeting was arranged at a small cafe not far from their apartment. As Sarah and Emily walked toward the cafe, Sarah's stomach was in knots. Emily, on the other hand, seemed excited, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Do you think Jonathan, will remember me?" Emily asked as they neared the cafe. "I think he will," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "He's been through a lot, but you helped him. I'm sure he'll be happy to see you." When they entered the cafe, Sarah immediately spotted Edward and Catherine Edwards, Jonathan's parents. They were seated at a table near the window, their faces etched with both relief and exhaustion. Jonathan was there too, looking healthier than when Emily had last seen him, though still a little fragile. His eyes lit up the moment he saw Emily. "Emily!" he called out, standing up to greet her. Emily ran over to him, her face beaming with happiness. Jonathan! Are you feeling better?" Jonathan smiled warmly as he knelt down to her level. "I am, thanks to you," he said softly. "You helped me remember who I am." As Emily and Jonathan spoke, Sarah sat down with Edward and Catherine, who were watching the interaction with tears in their eyes. Catherine reached across the table and took Sarah's hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "We've been searching for Jonathan for so long," Catherine said. "What your daughter did, it's more than we could have ever hoped for. She brought our son back to us." Sarah blinked back tears. "She was just being herself. She's always been a kind soul." Edward leaned forward, his expression serious but filled with gratitude. "We want to do something to honor what Emily did. We've been thinking of starting a foundation, something to help people like Jonathan, people who have lost their way." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A foundation? The idea was noble, but it also felt overwhelming. They had only just met, and already the Edwards family was talking about starting something big, something that could change people's lives. But what did that mean to Emily? Would she be thrust into the spotlight, making the face of this foundation? "We'd love for you and Emily to be involved," Edward continued, "but we don't want to pressure you. It's entirely up to you." Sarah hesitated, glancing over at Emily, who was still deep in conversation with Jonathan. Her daughter had already done so much, and she was so young. Could she really handle something like this? "I'll have to think about it," Sarah said carefully. "I don't want to overwhelm Emily. She's just a child, and this is a lot." "Of course," Catherine said quickly. "We understand. But please know that we're here to support you both, whatever you decide." As the meeting came to an end, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions. The Edwards family's gratitude was genuine, and their offer to start a foundation was both touching and daunting. But most of all, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of pride in Emily. Her daughter had done something remarkable, something that had changed the lives of an entire family. That evening, after returning home, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, trying to process everything that had happened. The meeting with the Edwards family had gone better than she expected, but the idea of starting a foundation still weighed heavily on her mind. She didn't want to make any decisions without talking to Emily first. When Emily emerged from her bedroom, her eyes filled with excitement, Sarah knew the time had come for that conversation. "Mom," Emily said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm, "Jonathan's family is so nice, and they want to help other people like Jonathan. Isn't that cool?" Sarah smiled, motioning for Emily to come sit beside her at the table. "It is cool, sweetheart, but I want to talk to you about something important. Jonathan's family has offered to start a foundation in your honor, to help people who need it, like Jonathan. But I want to make sure this is something you really want to do." Emily's brow furrowed in thought. "A foundation? Where we help people?" "Yes," Sarah said gently, "but it could mean a lot of attention, and I don't want you to feel pressured. You've already done something amazing, and you don't have to do more if you don't want to." Emily looked down at the table, her small fingers tracing the grain of the wood as she thought. "I like helping people, Mom," she said quietly, "but I don't want everyone to be looking at me all the time." Sarah nodded, understanding her daughter's hesitation. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. We can help people, but we can also do it in a way that doesn't put all the pressure on you. We can be involved, but we don't have to be the center of attention." Emily's face brightened at the idea. "I like that. I want to help people, but I don't want it to be all about me." Sarah smiled, relieved by her daughter's response. "That sounds like a good plan. We'll talk to Jonathan's family and figure out a way to do this together." As Emily headed off to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. Her daughter's kindness had sparked something incredible, and now they had the chance to make a real difference in the world. But most importantly, they would do it on their own terms. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Emily worked closely with the Edwards family to develop plans for the Harper Foundation for Compassion and Recovery. The foundation's mission was simple: to help people who, like Jonathan, had lost their way and needed a helping hand to find their path again. They would focus on providing resources for the homeless and those suffering from memory loss or mental health issues, offering not only food and shelter, but also emotional support and rehabilitation. Sarah was careful to ensure that Emily's role remained behind the scenes. She didn't want her daughter to feel overwhelmed by the responsibility, but Emily was eager to contribute in her own way. She came up with the idea of setting up kindness stations around the city, places where people could stop for a free meal, a warm conversation, and a sense of community. As the foundation began to take shape, Sarah couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent so much of her life focused on raising Emily and making ends meet that she hadn't had time to think about what she could do to help others. Now, thanks to Emily's simple act of kindness, she had the chance to be part of something bigger, something that could truly make a difference. The foundation's launch event was held in the same park where Emily had first met Jonathan. It was a small, intimate gathering with local community members, a few media representatives, and the Edwards family in attendance. As they unveiled the foundation's name and mission, Sarah felt a swell of pride in her chest. This was just the beginning. As the event came to a close, Sarah watched as Emily chatted happily with Jonathan, her small face glowing with excitement. Despite the challenges they had faced, judgment by the community, the pressure of media attention, and the emotional weight of it all, Sarah knew that they had made the right decision. Together, they were building something beautiful, something that would continue to grow long after the initial spotlight had faded. The Harper Foundation for Compassion and Recovery was off to a promising start. In the weeks following the launch, Sarah and Emily found themselves busier than ever, working with the Edwards family to bring their vision to life. The initial plan was to establish kindness stations across the city, places where people like Jonathan could find support, a warm meal, and a friendly face. It was a simple idea, but one that resonated with the community. Emily, despite her young age, was a key part of the planning process. She had a knack for coming up with creative ideas, and her enthusiasm was contagious. One afternoon, as they sat around the kitchen table, brainstorming ways to engage the community, Emily piped up with a suggestion. "What if we had a kindness day?" she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Everyone in the city could do something nice for someone else. It could be big or small, like helping someone carry their groceries or buying them a coffee." Sarah smiled, proud of her daughter's ever-growing compassion. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily. We could even partner with local businesses to promote it." Catherine Edwards, who had become like an aunt to Emily, nodded in agreement. "I love it. A citywide day of kindness could really bring people together, and it would help spread the message of the foundation." As they continued to plan, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Just a few months ago, Emily shared a simple sandwich with a stranger in the park, and now they were building something that could change lives. The foundation was gaining traction, with volunteers signing up to help at the kindness stations and donations trickling in from local businesses and generous community members. But with growth came challenges. The media attention that had initially helped the foundation gain visibility was beginning to feel overwhelming. Reporters reached out to Sarah almost daily, wanting updates on the foundation's progress or asking for interviews with Emily. Sarah was determined to protect her daughter from intense scrutiny, but it was becoming harder to shield her from the spotlight. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and phone calls, Sarah sat on the couch exhausted. Emily was busy working on a school project at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mom," Emily said, not looking up from her work. "Sweetie," Sarah replied, her voice tired but affectionate. "Why do people keep asking about the foundation? It's like they want to know everything." Sarah sighed, knowing this was a conversation they needed to have. "People are interested in what we're doing because it's helping a lot of people. But sometimes when something good gets a lot of attention, people start asking a lot of questions. And not all of them are helpful." Emily put down her pencil and looked at her mother. "But it's not about me, right? It's about helping people like Jonathan. Sarah smiled softly. That's right. And we're going to keep it that way. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. We're doing this together, and we're doing it on our terms. Emily seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her project, her small face scrunched in concentration. But Sarah knew the challenges ahead would only grow more complicated. As the foundation grew, so did the public's interest. While most of the attention was positive, praising the work they were doing to help the homeless and those struggling with memory loss, there were also critics. Comments on social media began to surface, questioning the authenticity of the foundation, claiming it was a publicity stunt or accusing Sarah of exploiting her daughter for fame. The first time Sarah came across one of these comments, it stopped her in her tracks. She had been scrolling through her phone, reading through the messages of support that had been pouring in, when she saw it. Is this really about helping people? Or is it just a way for this woman to use her kid to get attention? Seems pretty convenient that they're getting all this media coverage. Sarah's heart sank. She knew there would always be people who doubted their intentions, but seeing the accusation in black and white felt like a punch to the gut. She tried to push the comment out of her mind, but as the days passed, more began to appear. Some were cruel, mocking Emily's involvement, while others questioned the foundation's legitimacy. Sarah had worked so hard to protect her daughter from this kind of negativity, but now it felt like it was closing in on them from all sides. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emily's usual chatter was noticeably absent. She pushed her food around on her plate, her face unusually somber. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with confusion. "Some kids at school were talking about the foundation today. They said people online are saying mean things about us. Are we doing something wrong?" Sarah's heart ached at the sight of her daughter's sadness. She had hoped to shield Emily from the negativity, but it seemed impossible to keep her in a bubble forever. "No, baby," Sarah said, reaching across the table to take Emily's hand. "We're not doing anything wrong. Some people just don't understand what we're trying to do. And when people don't understand, they sometimes say mean things." "But why?" Emily asked, her voice small. "We're just trying to help people." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, her voice firm but kind. "I know it doesn't make sense, but sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand. But what's important is that we know we're doing the right thing. We've helped so many people already, and we're going to keep doing that, no matter what anyone says." Emily nodded, though the doubt still lingered in her eyes. Sarah could tell that the weight of the scrutiny was starting to get to her daughter, and she felt an overwhelming need to protect her. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the foundation's social media pages. The positive comments far outweighed the negative, but it was the cruel words that seemed to stick in her mind. "You're doing something good," she whispered to herself, trying to push the doubts away. "You're making a difference." But the pressure was beginning to mount, and Sarah wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it all together. Despite the negativity, the foundation continued to grow. Sarah and Emily threw themselves into their work, focusing on expanding the kindness stations and helping as many people as they could. They were determined not to let the critics slow them down. One afternoon, while visiting one of the kindness stations, Sarah had a conversation that would change her perspective on the public scrutiny they were facing. She had been helping serve meals to a group of homeless individuals when an older man approached her, his face weathered by years of hardship. "Are you the lady who started all this?" he asked. His voice was rough but kind. Sarah smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "I helped to start it, yes. But it was really my daughter who inspired it." The man nodded, looking around at the kindness station. "This place? It's changed my life. I've been on the streets for years, and I've never had a place like this. You give us more than just food. You give us hope." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as the man spoke. It was moments like this that reminded her why they had started the foundation in the first place. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As the man walked away, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The critics and the negativity no longer seemed to matter as much. What mattered was the people they were helping, the lives they were changing. And as long as they kept their focus on that, nothing else could shake them. That evening, as they walked home from the kindness station, Sarah turned to Emily, who was skipping happily beside her. "Sweetie," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful, Do you remember how we talked about people saying mean things online? Emily nodded, looking up at her mother. But I don't listen to them anymore. I know we're doing something good. Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Exactly. And today I met someone who told me that our kindness stations have given him hope. Isn't that amazing? We're making a real difference. Emily beamed. That's what I wanted, Mom. I just want people to feel loved. Sarah's heart swelled with love for her daughter. In her short life, Emily had already touched so many people's lives with her kindness, and Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. As the foundation continued to expand, the kindness stations became a fixture in the community. More and more people came to volunteer, eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. The media attention, while still present, became less of a burden as Sarah learned to manage it, focusing on the positive impact rather than the negativity. One day, while working at one of the stations, Emily had an idea. Mom, she said, her eyes shining with excitement, what if we made little kindness kits, like bags with food, water, and blankets that people can give to others? Then everyone could be part of the kindness. Sarah smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. That's a brilliant idea, Emily. We could even ask local businesses to help us put them together. Within weeks, the kindness kits were a reality. Volunteers gathered at the kindness stations to assemble the kits, filling bags with food, water, blankets, and even handwritten notes of encouragement. The kits were then distributed to people throughout the city with a simple message: kindness matters. The kindness kits were a hit. People from all walks of life began to participate, from local business owners to school children. The kits were more than just a way to provide for those in need. They were a reminder that small acts of kindness could make a big difference. As the kindness movement grew, so did the foundation's reach. They began to receive inquiries from cities across the country, asking how they could start their own kindness stations. Sarah and Emily worked tirelessly to expand the foundation's mission, setting up partnerships with organizations in other cities and training volunteers to run the stations. It wasn't long before the kindness movement had spread to cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. What had started as a simple act of kindness in a small park had blossomed into a national movement, touching thousands of lives. One afternoon, as Sarah and Emily stood at the opening of a new kindness station in Chicago, Sarah looked down at her daughter, her heart filled with pride. Look at what you started, Sarah said softly. You've changed the world, Emily, smiled, her eyes sparkling with happiness. We did it together, Mom, and it's not over yet. By the time the Harper Foundation for Compassion and Recovery had established kindness stations in multiple cities, Sarah and Emily were overwhelmed by the scope of what they had started. What began as a small local effort had now blossomed into a nationwide movement, inspiring people from all walks of life to participate in spreading kindness. The Foundation's mission, to help those struggling with homelessness, memory loss, and mental health, had resonated with communities far beyond their own. Cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami had embraced kindness stations, and even smaller towns across the country were beginning to establish their own. Local businesses, schools, and churches all rallied behind the cause, contributing resources and time to keep the kindness stations running. Emily's idea of the kindness kits had grown even more than Sarah had imagined. Not only were people distributing kits in their local communities, but they were also being sent to shelters, hospitals, and even disaster areas where they provided comfort to those in need. The handwritten notes included in each kit were especially impactful, offering words of encouragement to strangers who needed them most. But with this rapid growth came new challenges. Running a national movement was no easy task, and Sarah found herself struggling to balance her responsibilities as a mother, a leader, and a community organizer. She often worked late into the night, answering emails, coordinating volunteers, and trying to manage the foundation's expanding infrastructure. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her laptop opened in front of her, Emily approached with a concerned look on her face. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily asked, her small voice full of worry. Sarah looked up, startled by the question. She had been so focused on her work that she hadn't realized how exhausted she looked. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said with a tired smile. "There's just a lot to do." Emily frowned, her brow furrowed in concern. "You're always working. I thought we were doing this together." Sarah's heart ached at her daughter's words. She had been so caught up in the responsibilities of running the foundation that she hadn't considered how it was affecting Emily. "We are doing this together," Sarah said gently, reaching out to take Emily's hand. "But sometimes, when things grow this big, there's a lot more work to do. I'm sorry if it feels like I'm not spending enough time with you." Emily's eyes softened. "It's okay, Mom. I just don't want you to be too tired." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. "I'll try to take more breaks. How about this weekend we spend the whole day together? No work, just us." Emily's face lit up with excitement. "Really? Can we go to the park and have a picnic?" "Of course," Sarah said, laughing softly. "We'll make it a special day." As Emily skipped off to her room, Sarah leaned back in her chair, realizing that she needed to find a better balance between her responsibilities. The foundation was important, but so was her role as Emily's mother. She couldn't let one overshadow the other. That weekend, Sarah and Emily enjoyed their day at the park, just as they had promised. They spread out a blanket, ate sandwiches, and played games, savoring the rare break from their busy lives. For a few hours, it was as if the world outside their small bubble didn't exist, and Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. As they sat together on the blanket, watching the sunset, Emily turned to her mother with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think we'll always be helping people?" Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think we'll always be helping people in some way. Kindness doesn't stop just because things get busy. It's something we can do every day, even in small ways." Emily nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I like that. I want to keep helping people no matter what." Sarah felt a surge of pride as she hugged her daughter close. Emily's heart was as big as ever, and Sarah knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would continue to make a difference, together. As the kindness movement continued to spread, something remarkable began to happen. Stories of small acts of kindness started to pour in from all over the country. People who had received kindness kits were paying it forward, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond what Sarah and Emily had ever imagined. One day, Sarah received a letter from a woman in Seattle named Linda Jacobs. In the letter, Linda explained how she had been going through a difficult time, struggling with depression and isolation. One day, while sitting alone on a park bench, someone handed her a kindness kit. Inside the kit was a handwritten note that simply reads, "You matter. Don't give up." Linda wrote that those words had changed her life. In that moment, she realized that there were people out there who cared about her, even though they didn't know her. The simple act of receiving the kit gave her the strength to seek help, and she had since been volunteering at a local shelter, determined to pass on the kindness she had received. Sarah was moved to tears as she read the letter. It was just one story, but it encapsulated everything the foundation stood for. The kindness they had spread was now inspiring others to do the same, creating a chain of compassion that was growing by the day. Similar stories began to arrive in the form of letters, emails, and social media posts. A man in Chicago had received a kindness kit after losing his job and his home, and it gave him the hope he needed to keep going. A teacher in Atlanta started a kindness club at her school, encouraging her students to perform small acts of kindness for their classmates. A family in Miami, who had been struggling financially, received help from their community after their neighbors were inspired by the kindness movement. Each story was a reminder that kindness had the power to change lives in ways that Sarah and Emily had never anticipated. It wasn't just about the people they were helping directly. It was about the ripple effect that their kindness had set in motion. One afternoon, as Sarah and Emily sat together, reading through the latest batch of letters, Emily looked up with wide eyes. "Mom, look at all these people we've helped," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I didn't know it would get this big." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "Me neither, sweetheart, but it's because of you. You started something incredible." Emily beamed, her small chest puffing with pride. "We started it together." As they continued to read the letters, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had always known that kindness mattered, but she had never expected it to have such a far-reaching impact. The kindness movement had taken on a life of its own, and now it has inspired people all over the world to be more compassionate, more generous, and more kind. As the foundation's success continued to grow, so did the challenges. While the kindness movement was spreading, So too were the logistical hurdles of managing a national organization. Sarah found herself grappling with issues she had never anticipated: funding shortages, volunteer shortages, and the constant pressure to keep up with the demand for kindness kits and new kindness stations. One afternoon, Sarah received a phone call from Edward Edwards, Jonathan's father, who had been a key supporter of the foundation from the beginning. "Sarah, we need to talk," Edward said, his tone serious. "We've hit a bit of a roadblock with the foundation's funding. We're growing faster than we can keep up with, and we're going to need some serious financial backing if we want to keep this going." Sarah's heart sank. She had always known that funding would be a challenge, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made her realize how precarious their situation was. Without sufficient funds, the kindness stations and kits that had become a lifeline for so many people would be in jeopardy. "What are our options?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "We can try reaching out to more corporate sponsors," Edward suggested. "We've already got a few on board, but we need more if we're going to sustain this level of growth." Sarah nodded, though her mind was racing. She had always wanted to keep the foundation's mission focused on people, not profits. But if they didn't secure more funding, they wouldn't be able to continue helping people at all. That evening, as she sat down with Emily to explain the situation, she was met with the same determined expression she had seen on her daughter's face so many times before. "We can't let the kindness stations close," Emily said firmly. "We have to keep helping people." Sarah smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "We're going to do everything we can, sweetheart. But sometimes, even when we try our hardest, things don't always work out the way we want them to." Emily's eyes shone with determination. "I believe in us, Mom. We've come this far. We can figure it out." As word spread about the foundation's financial difficulties, something remarkable happened. The very community that Sarah and Emily had set out to help began to rally around them. People who had benefited from the kindness stations, families who had received kindness kits, and volunteers who had given their time all came together to support the foundation. Local businesses that had initially donated small amounts stepped up with larger contributions. Schools held fundraisers, and churches organized charity drives. Even individuals who had once been homeless, but had gotten back on their feet thanks to the foundation's help, began to donate what they could. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kindness station, overseeing the latest batch of volunteers, she received a phone call from Edward. "You're not going to believe this," Edward said, his voice full of excitement. "We've raised enough money to keep the kindness stations open for the next year." Sarah's heart swelled with relief and gratitude. "I can't believe it. How did this happen?" Edward laughed. "The community came through for us. People believe in what we're doing, and they want to help us keep it going." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she looked around at the kindness station, filled with volunteers, families, and individuals who had all come together to make a difference. It wasn't just about her or Emily anymore. It was about the power of community, the power of kindness. That evening, as Sarah and Emily walked home, hand in hand, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced so many challenges along the way, but they had also experienced so much love and support. The kindness movement had taken on a life of its own, and now it was unstoppable. As they reached their apartment, Emily turned to her mother with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, do you think we'll ever stop helping people?" Sarah smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I don't think we ever will. Kindness is part of who we are now." Emily grinned. "Good, because I want to keep making the world better." And as they stepped inside their cozy home, Sarah knew without a doubt that they would continue to make the world a kinder place, one small act of compassion at a time. Thank you for watching this heartwarming story about kindness and the power of community. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more inspiring tales, please consider subscribing to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing meaningful stories like this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message of kindness even further.